Welcome back to part 3 of How to Night Runners. So, as the Minecraft YouTubers when I say, I did a little bit of mining off stream. You can see there's two S15s now, and they're both quite modified. Ignore this one in the corner for now. That is my pet project for this save. And I did modify this car. And I'm going to walk you through everything I've done. It's all very basic. It just looks really crazy now. So let's go ahead and do that. And before I get too deep into this, this video is meant to be a how to prepare for SK video, because a lot of people seem to find him very menacing and hard to deal with. And I personally believe it's because they modified their car incorrectly for it. So I'm going to teach you how to circumvent that. So starting here with the exterior, I just went ahead and put the S15 basic lights on there instead of the S14 style. All the arrow I have on here, like on the left side, it says 65 kilograms downforce. For SK, that really doesn't matter. You don't need a very high downforce number for most of the races in this game. You will want it later on when you're in the high horsepower battles with Endless Appeal. But while you're in G Company, you can pretty much ignore it. It's got a basic body kit, the cheapest of what you can get. It's made to look cool. So yeah, there's nothing too special going on there. Interior parts, I just put in a roll cage and the drift button and the steering wheel. Those are the only three things that affect performance at all here. As you can see, the stock steering wheel lowers my weight and lowers my handling. So, you know, you don't really need it. It's just an aesthetic thing for the most part. Same with gauges. You don't need them. Now on the handbrake, you can have the stock one, but with the stock handbrake, the issue you have is that the handbrake is a toggle versus with the drift button, you have to hold the handbrake button for it to be on. It's not a toggle thing, so you can properly drift a little bit better with this upgrade. And this is just another version of the drift button handbrake. They function exactly the same. This one just is better looking for drift style cars. Let's take a look at the cage right quick. Now the roll cage, you do get a little bit of weight savings, or sorry, you don't get a little bit of weight savings. It does add weight for these lower ones. It says it helps my weight just because I have the next tier one. But with some of them, you do gain handling. It is not a big amount of handling. It's kind of negligible. It is mostly a style thing. So if you see that, it's just like, you don't have to do that. But now to get into the bread and butter of what's done to this car, obviously I have good wheels on it, but the wheels don't affect the performance at all. They still have the same weight and handling with these wheels on. For the tires, the very first upgrades you should do to your car as soon as you get a little bit of money in this game is you need to go to semi-slick tires. The game completely changes in the grip factor as soon as you have these tires on. Let's take a look at the engine. So you can see I have increased cooling, the stock power, and the stock torque. And so the way the AI works in this game is they scale to your horsepower. And so if you're trying to race SK with 500 plus horsepower, you're only doing yourself a detriment, because the AI still grips up the same in the high power levels, but you're fighting the car for that grip on those high horsepower cars. So I personally keep it below like 350, especially for G Company. Again, you do need 550 horsepower plus to race Endless Appeal properly and gain rep. But as I did in the first episode, I put in the intercooler, because cooling is very important, especially for the long races against SK and other bosses. You will overheat. Even with upwards of 90% cooling, you're going to overheat on the top of the run. And again, this is all very early on in a save. I don't have many circuit parts unlocked at all. And if you do insist on adding a little bit of power, the very first thing you should put in is an ECU. So with the circuit ECU, you can actually do launch control. And with launch control, you can have more grip at the start of races, so you're not sitting there spinning out for 3 seconds before you actually grip up. It holds your RPMs at, I believe, 4,500, and then as soon as the light flashes, you immediately gripped up faster. And again, even with just the street intercooler, the cooling is still above 100%, and it gives you a little bit of power and torque. So the circuit ECU should be your first power upgrade if you insist on doing one. The other notable upgrades you might want to do is, of course, getting your engine strength up if you are below 100%. But the camshafts also have somewhat of a hidden thing where with each upgrade your red line increases. So with street, I think it goes to like 7,500. With circuit, it goes to 8,200, and prototype, it goes to 9,000 RPM. On the S15 specifically, it can change depending on the motor you have in the car, whether it's the RB, the 1JZ, whatever else. And I believe that's about it. Oh, sorry, I did miss NOS. So NOS is kind of important for boss races because it can make or break the very end of your run. I personally like to use the street low power NOS because it has 4 shots. So if you really have to, you can use it twice in a race. And like I said, the very last stretch is where you're really going to need it, where you're head to head with the boss. And you can see on the left side, it says it drops my strength to 0. That's not true. It's kind of a UI error because it only drops the strength that low while the NOS is in use. So if you're racing normally, your engine strength will not be 0%. It'll be whatever it was prior to you installing the NOS. So yeah, it only affects it while the NOS is in use. Don't worry about it too much, especially if you have a high grade car. It's the difference that it makes is negligible on the engine strength, especially when in use. So yeah, I stick with street low power. And that's about it for most of the engine upgrades. If you really want to prepare well and you have a 5-speed S15 compared to the 6-speed, you can get the sport ratio gearbox, and that helps you accelerate out of corners a little bit more because it lowers the final drive. And if you're not in the cars, the final drive is basically just the rear diff ratio. So, more spins of the motor, and it just how gears work. Kind of hard to explain. Now, the main important thing you're going to want to look at is handling parts. So you can get by with street brakes. I personally like to go for the circuit ones. The prototype you can really skip out on just because they're so expensive, especially in the early game. Control arms, again, I just run prototype. If I would recommend a minimum of circuit parts on handling, but I again opt for prototype if I can. Coilovers, sway bars, pretty much everything. And the last upgrade in the handling section is the differential. The race differential is obviously the best, but they are a little bit different. Obviously, the welded is mainly for drifting. The LSD is better than an open diff, but you can totally get by on an open diff. It's just you're going to accelerate a little bit slower out of corners with the way wheel spin works. So yeah, opt for the race diff if you can. It's only 240,000. You should be able to make that in one race. The steering knuckle that you just saw there was, it's the only part there is for the drift cars. There's no actual performance stuff there. And again, in the first video, I said that tire width matters. I'm going to go over that again really quickly. I like to stick between 255 and 265 on the fronts because if you go too wide on the fronts, you're just going to understeer in the corners. And nothing else here matters except for the tire width. And jumping over to the rear, you will see I have 295. So I like to stick between 295 and 305s in the rear. If you have too much, you can be especially slow accelerating because on your low horsepower cars, it's a lot on the motor to actually spin those really wide wheels. However, if you have a very high horsepower car and you're, racing endless appeal, 325 is perfectly fine. Because you will spin less in corners and you'll be able to find grip faster if you do spin out. So let me bring that down to 295 again. That's essentially where your car wants to be for racing the bosses because, again, the AI scales to your horsepower and you're just fighting yourself if you have too high of a horsepower for those boss races. So let's go ahead and I'm going to take you to some race techniques that you might need to beat him. See you on the Touge. So here we are, a little bit up the Touge. We're about to cross the first hairpin. And I'd like to show you some of the more advanced driving techniques because I have a lot of hours in this game compared to most people. So, I've had more time to practice. And one thing I do want to point out is on the left side, you can see my brake temp and you can see the brake temp gauge. When you have any kind of upgraded brakes, whether that be street, circuit, prototype, because brake fade does exist in this game. You can feel it if you're going to a hairpin with fully cold brakes versus fully hot brakes. And obviously the higher grade ones do cool down faster. So let's go ahead and show you some hairpin techs. So as you're approaching the hairpin, you might want to start braking a little bit earlier than you think, and you always want to take the hairpin in second. I'm going slow right now, but you typically never want to drop down to first gear on the Touge, because there's not really any place that you can really use for it, unless you really mess up and get turned around, but it just makes you spin out faster. So here we are getting to some of the more consecutive hairpins. You really want to take the inside line because of all the AI take the outside line, and it's kind of on purpose to let you pass. And I did forget to mention the controller layout on the middle right part of the screen, so you can see all my inputs. You know, you can analyze them a little bit more. But here we are, consecutive hairpins. Third, back down to second. Feather the throttle through it so you don't lose grip. Let's get through these hairpins. Brake a little bit, feather throttle again. You don't have to worry about losing traction nearly as much if you have semi-slicks on stock power. And you can take the line pretty tight. It doesn't penalize you if you just clip the grass a little bit. It does get a little bit harder with the JZX chassis because they're so much bigger. And so when it comes to the shifting in this game, the clutch timing is a little bit weird to get used to, because sometimes you're able to press the clutch after you shift and it still shifts much faster. So if you're watching here, if I just hit it without the clutch, it shifts really, really slow. And that's not ideal for coming up on hairpins like this. See, if I'm in fourth gear, I want to take it very fast. It's kind of hard to do if you're in the high gears on the throttle. So what you can do if you're in a high gear is, you know, you just actually hold the clutch and then press it as much as you want, and then it'll go down to whatever gear you stop at. The clutch does take a little bit of practice to get good with, but once you do, it is very rewarding, especially on those hairpins. Like I said, the hairpins are the most difficult part to master on the Touge. And each map will kind of have its own difficulties, but on the Touge, it's definitely the hairpins. Okay, so the next thing I kind of want to touch on is your racing line. The racing line does matter a lot, and getting to know it and where the AI is going to run, because it's kind of hard now with all the updates, but the AI can still pit you if you're really not on a very good line. And you can gain quite a bit of distance if you take the optimal line compared to what the AI takes. So let's go ahead and run through this section. And like I said, just watch my racing line and see like how close I cut it on some of these corners. The gutter run from Initial D does work a little bit, unironically. So you can experiment that with that if you really want, but I personally don't like to clip it that close. Most of that section you can take in second. On the downhill, you might want to take some of it in third. And I'm going to talk about the 6-speed S15 here in a minute. But the gearing does change for some of the cars. So there's some corners in some cars where you'll take it in second, and some corners in other cars where you'll take the same corner in third gear. And here we are, hairpin. You can see my brake temp shooting up. Again, take it in second, and be careful not to do what I just did and put too much angle into the car as you're steering with too much throttle, because that is entirely how you lose grip. So the next thing I'm going to touch on is just plain map knowledge. So when it comes to boss races, your mini map is fully turned off. You're going into it blind. You don't know which corner is which. So it's very important to run the map a couple times just for practice, to get to know the corners, what gear to be in where, and just get to know the car you're driving for it. A lot of people underestimate the map knowledge in this game, because you think, oh, it's just a straight line, you know, it's a straight road, I can't turn off anywhere. But it is very important to properly know the map. So the last thing I'd like to touch on a little bit is the different car models between the S15 SE and the ST. So the starter car you get is the SE, and if you really did want to play it safe, you can get the sport gear ratios for the SE and run fine. Or if you get lucky enough in the auction house and find a good setup ST, it is very worth the difference, because the ST has 6 speeds, or 6 gears, I should say, rather than 5. And what that means is there's less gear bog in the hairpins. So you're accelerating faster out of the corners because you're at a higher RPM than you would be with the 5-speed. Again, you can just get the sport gear ratios and be fine, or even just with the stock transmission be fine. But if you can get your hands on an ST, I would very much recommend it. It is the better car in the long run, especially if you plan on RB swapping, which, yes, that's a thing. My next video will likely be all the different content you can access right now. So I'd reckon that's about it for this video. The last thing I would like to mention is that you have to race SK, or the other sub-boss in Endless Appeal, Sonny. You have to race them twice and before you can beat the crew and get the ability to join them. You have to race him once when you're halfway through, and then the next time when Star Tamer appears, you have to race him one more time before you can race Star Tamer. And most of these techniques still do apply for Star Tamer. I would just get around like the 350 to 400 horsepower mark for Star Tamer, as again, the AI horsepower does scale to your car, so it makes it more difficult if you're above like 500 in the horsepower numbers. So yeah, that's it. Be sure to comment if I did leave anything out that you think should be included, and I can make a big pinned comment with any other techniques. But yeah, my next video is going to be the content that's already in the game and what we're going to see very soon, because I'm kind of tapped in with that and can let you know. So yeah, wait for part 4.